Remember that darkness simply requires another way of seeing. Be your own light, and just like that, you'll find yourself everywhere, instantly. Quanberry, we ride upon sticks. Welcome to Books in the Freezer, a podcast dedicated to the deliciously disturbing world of horror fiction. I'm your host, Stephanie, and today I'm joined by author, poet, and instructor Stephanie Wytovich to discuss witches in fiction. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited to talk to you about this because it's a topic that has been requested, and I know that you know a lot about this, so I'm very excited.
I'm excited to talk about it.
Well, you teach a class on witch fiction. So what are some of the tenets or common components of like what we would call a witch story?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple different archetypes that I like to focus on in class. The four that I mainly focus on when I'm teaching are the hunted, the isolated, the enraged, and the fabled. So depending on what type of, witch story somebody wants to tell, we're going to probably be working in, with at least one of those, maybe more at the same time, of those archetypes to kind of flesh out the character and kind of tell us what kind of witch he or she is.
Okay, so is there stories that don't have a witch like on the page, but that those archetypes would like apply to them?
Oh yeah, totally. So I know when I first posted, so I started teaching the class as like a 15-week undergraduate class at Point Park University, which I was like super pumped because I thought no one in their right mind would ever let me teach a witch class. And I remember when I posted my reading list on Twitter, I had everybody was like coming for me and they were kind of arguing because I had Carrie by Stephen King on there. And they were like, in no way, shape, or form is that a witch book. And I was like, I'm pretty sure it is. and it's kind of interesting because, Carrie is this enraged, female character. And I mean, she's telekinetic. She has these powers that she doesn't understand. And we kind of see her getting more and more empowered, maybe not for everybody's benefit, throughout the book. But we see her kind of coming to terms with who she is, and that type of like acceptance of identity. And, we see that in like Robert Eger's The Witch, things like that. That really kind of feeds into the archetype of the witch too. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, a woman or a man who has legitimate powers or, who's riding a broomstick or has a cottage in the backwoods somewhere. But this kind of like acceptance of power and kind of, return to kind of to nature or to like our natural instincts and habitats, like kind of like some folk horror tropes in there too, I think kind of fleshes that out a little bit as well.
I like that. That's very interesting. I can definitely see that.
Yeah, and it's kind of cool because so I've been researching, the archetype of the witch for, I don't know, maybe about 5 years, five or so years now. I don't think I'll ever stop, honestly, at this point. And I was teaching a grad class this semester, and we were doing young adult fiction. And I had assigned, in no way, shape, or form, planning to talk about The Witch, White Oleander by Janet Fitch. And the more that my student and I kept kind of reading through it, I was like, this, like Ingrid, the mother character in the book, like she's 1,000% a witch. She's working with cycles and she's manipulative and she's kind of like, she's using her power and seduction to kind of get people to ebb and flow the way that she wants. So even though she's not traditionally, somebody that we would look at and say, oh, witch, she has this confidence and this empowerment, and she uses it to sway opinion. And, she's probably not a very good witch if we're going to, go with that archetype. But she certainly kind of fits in with all of those kind of character traits. So I thought that was like, now I'm finding the witch in places I never would have, ever thought to find her, which is kind of cool.
That is cool. Do you think Amy Dunn would be a witch?
She, you know what? It's been a while since I've read the book or watched the movie. But I think she kind of could. I think that would be a fun. Maybe I'll read that
Yeah.
this summer again and kind of see what I can pull. Yeah, because I mean, she definitely the way she kind of. I don't want to say like the witch is like a gaslighting horrible human
Yeah,
like kind
no,
of like
she's
she is, but the way that she kind of wields her identity and uses it for power, and she kind of manipulates, time and space and people and everything like that. She's very methodical. Like it could totally
yeah.
work. Mhm. Yeah, for sure. Oh, that's cool.
What draws you in to stories about witches?
So let's see here. So around the time that I started researching the witch, I had been kind of flirting with the occult for quite some time. And it was interesting because the more that I researched the witch in fiction and in film and stuff like that, the more I started to kind of find some camaraderie and like find myself in my own identity kind of wrapped up and intertwined within her. And like I said, you can kind of find the witch in a lot of places that you might not suspect. So the more that I started to kind of think about it, I noticed like this has kind of always been a part of a part of who I am. Back from the first time I watched The Craft. I mean, it's just kind of always like that interest of the occult and kind of what's out there has always kind of been brimming. But I was raised a very, very strict, staunch Catholic, so I was told to stay the hell away from all of that, and I did for a very long time until I kind of grew up and got away from some of that. And so the more that I started researching it, I started going to actual witches, and I started listening to a whole bunch of different podcasts. I read, Pam Grossman's Waking the Witch. I was, Gabriella Herstick. I started following her on Instagram, and, a whole host of other practicing witches. And I was like, this is 1,000% my thing. Like, I feel at home here. I feel like I get this. I want to be around it 24/7. So it kind of shifted a lot of like my interest in my spiritual practices. And then that kind of line between, okay, this is research for, academia versus this is just who I am now completely disappeared. And so I really, the idea of empowerment is really refreshing to me, especially because like I said, as a former recovering Catholic, and no shade to people who still practice Catholicism, like it's very intertwined in who I am as a person and even in my practice still today. But I like the idea that there's more, sexual positivity, and paganism and witchcraft. There's more, kind of female empowerment. You don't have to really suppress rage. I feel like, the line of mental health and self-care, just in general, for however people interpret that in the occult, is something that's very focused on like shadow work and stuff like that. So when I see it in books and films, and then, in my day-to-day practice, I'm all over it. It seems so positive and enriching, and it fuels me creatively and stuff like that. And it just makes me feel like, honestly, like I'm a better version of myself these days.
So with your research and taking in all this witch media, what do you think has been probably the most accurate portrayal of like true to life witchcraft?
That's tough. Especially in horror. That's
Yeah,
tough.
like it's a little.
Yeah, I I recently watched Pie Whack It. I did a rewatch because I was listening to a Faculty of Horror episode on it. And the more that I watch that movie, the more that I think it's fairly accurate. I mean, there's like the jump scares and the stuff, that we all want as horror fans.
Yeah.
But there's also part of me that's like, yeah, maybe that could happen. Maybe this isn't necessarily just to scare people. Maybe it's actually to scare them so they don't do what this girl is doing. So I think that one would be probably one that I would recommend to people because, she's kind of, doing these spells and these rituals from a place of like anger and rage. She doesn't really know what she's doing. She's just kind of putting it out there and kind of thinking that it's a joke, and then it's obviously not a joke. And I feel like with certain certain things in witchcraft. You gotta, your intent needs to matter. You gotta know where you're coming from. And I think there's a lot of good lessons with that. So that would probably be the one that I would pick out of everything. And then in terms of literature, which obviously we're talking about, I'm going to have to go with Shirley Jackson's We Have Always Lived in the Castle. I think that would probably, and again, they're not like the stereotypical witches. They're kind of two women who are, who are isolated, and the town kind of deems them witches, and maybe they are and maybe they're not. But they would kind of flirt with that archetype a little bit in a way that I think is pretty spot on for, especially when we think about like the burning times and the witch trials and stuff like that, why people were called witches and stuff like that. I think that would probably be pretty historically accurate.
Just from the like isolated town outsider aspect of it. I mean, Mary also has her like little things she does outside, her little rituals.
I know, she's so cool. I love her. And it's neat because they both kind of fit these like two different versions of the witch. Like Mary Cat, like you said, she kind of like, she has these rituals that she thinks will keep her safe and keep her sister safe. So she's running around and, putting stuff, nailing stuff to trees and digging up snakes. And, she has her 3 powerful words. And then Constance is more of a kitchen witch. She likes being in the house. She likes playing with herbs. She knows all the mushrooms. She likes to cook and kind of, use her magic that way. So it's neat to kind of see how you have like the wild and the domestic, like they both need those parts of each other to survive and to coexist and take care of each other. So it's a neat way that Jackson kind of both put herself in the book, but also showed different versions of what a witch can be.
Oh, I love that.
I'm obsessed with Shirley Jackson. I can talk about her forever. So please tell me to shut up.
Oh man, what other good witch movies are there? There's a lot, I feel like.
Yeah, I was sitting here and I was trying to think of, some of the more recent ones. So definitely if you haven't seen Pyewacket, I would definitely check that out because that didn't have a huge release. I'm sure most people have seen The Witch and Midsommar by now. There was a movie, I think it came out in 2017, and I'm going to butcher the name of it, but I'm pronouncing it like how it looks like you would spell it. But it looks like it's Haguza, Hagazussa. And it's a very ambiance forward movie. It's very graphic. So like all the trigger warnings for like sexual assault and violence and stuff like that. But it's a very dark, witchy type of movie. So I think if you can watch those types of things without it affecting you, I definitely think that would be something to jump into. And then some other ones that maybe people haven't looked at through the witchcraft lens. So Rosemary's Baby as a witch movie, The Autopsy of Jane Doe as a witch movie. Even Hereditary. I think everybody kind of looks at Hereditary as like religious horror kind of in a way, or just kind of like occult horror, which of course it is. But if we look at that strictly through the lens of the witch and kind of what that means for sexuality and gender and things like that, we can definitely pull a lot from that film as well. And then a film that kind of highlights men as the witch would be The Ritual. I think would be a good one to kind of look at because you're getting a lot of like pagan folk horror tropes throughout that, but you're also getting a lot of interesting witch vibes as well. So those might be some cool ones to like revisit looking at through a different lens.
That would be good. I mean, there's so much intertwined within like culty folk horror and like witchiness. So like also Harvest Home, I think would be like a really good one for that. I love the new Suspiria too.
Oh my gosh. Yes. So, I remember like I started watching it at like 2 a.m. I made sure everybody, like the dogs were asleep in the house. Dennis was nowhere to be found. And I just like sat down in my living room and watched it and was like sobbing because it's so perfect and creepy and beautiful and terrifying. Yeah, absolutely. Very seldom do I like the remakes more than the original, but oh my gosh, that one just wins.
I think so too. It's so long though. It's like 3 hours.
Yeah, it's a whole evening.
Yeah.
Or a morning in my case. But yeah.
I know. know, not horror, but I do love practical magic. That's like my cozy witch movie.
We actually, when I taught it at Point Park, we watched it, and it was funny because we had been doing all of this really dark, like intense literature, and then we watched Practical Magic, and it was kind of this like unspoken like, okay, we needed that. We needed some like lighthearted magic to kind of bring us back to a safe place again. But yeah, Practical Magic is great. I like I Married a Witch, Bell Book and Candle, which are kind of some older ones. Even those I think are like cute to watch, and they're good. Like if you're really getting into the archetype of the witch, you definitely have to check those ones out.
You notice any changing attitudes towards the witch character like through the decades?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I think even like I can remember even like when I was younger, when like Roald Dahl's witches came out, like witches were supposed to be scary, they were evil, they were frightening, and they still can be that, like absolutely. But it was very much like there wasn't any type of redemption to the witch. Like it wasn't somebody that you wanted to connect with. And I think over the past maybe like 10 years or so, as we've kind of seen this like rise in like more people going towards like spirituality and like non-traditional and non-denominational paths and stuff like that, as well as kind of the witch kind of rising up and kind of becoming this symbol for empowerment. And I think a lot of that has to do, you know, politically and stuff like that with some movements that have been happening, you know, with the Me Too movement, with feminism, like all of these conversations, Black Lives Matter, like all of this. The witch is kind of, you know, she's rising up again because, you know, she is stereotypically the outsider. She's the one that was wrong. She's the one that always had to fight. She's the one that has continued to survive and survive despite oppression, despite, you know, and whatever people have done to her. And so she kind of becomes this figure that people want to connect with and be because she is, you know, the definition of survival, of, you know, becoming the strongest version of yourself and rising from the flame. She's like the phoenix. And so I think we're seeing that more and more in literature and film. And I think Eager's film The Witch is the perfect example of that. You know, Thomasin was constantly oppressed and attacked by her family and verbally abused and literally locked away. And, you know, was she a witch when the film started? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not, but she certainly was by the end of it. And it is kind of this like freedom, like, you know, she's rising above patriarchy, rising above her oppression, and she's, you know, she's becoming whole and becoming herself. So I think, you know, we've gone from the witch being something terrifying and evil to the witch being something really positive, which I think is really cool. Especially because like even in situations like Carrie, where, you know, she is typically this evil kind of witch who, you know, takes out her rage, but she's also, you know, she doesn't understand her power. She doesn't understand what's going on. She's been horribly kind of traumatized. And this is kind of her way of asking for help without asking for help. Like you can kind of look at her character as, you know, when I read it, I don't really see Carrie so much as the villain. Like it's her mother. To me, I think Margaret White is 1,000% the villain, and Carrie's just kind of, you know, the collateral damage and things. So I don't know that a lot of us connect or look up to Carrie, but like, you know, that idea of the enraged woman, of like somebody fighting back, even if it's the like she's almost kind of like the new final girl in some ways, which is kind of neat, seeing that enraged, you know, archetype kind of throughout film and literature. So I kind of dig that.
I've always related to Carrie. I don't know what that says about me.
It doesn't say anything bad about you. I think we all just want to like hold Carrie and be her friend. But I kind of, those like the females on fire, like even Portrait of a Lady on Fire, of a Woman on Fire, I can't remember the exact title. Like that movie is beautifully witchy. That would be another good one for people to watch who are interested in like accurate portrayals. And that you could, you know, you literally have a woman on fire. You have like women who are trying to help each other when there's nothing, kind of no other turns to make. And I like angry women.
Yeah.
Women in my films. I like angry women in my books. Like I'm here for it. So the more rage that's on the page, like that's what's going to get me.
I love that. More rage on the page.
Yeah. It's my tagline from now on.
I love it. Well, should we talk about some witchy books?
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Libro FM. Libro FM is the first and only company which lets you purchase audiobooks directly from your favorite local bookstore. You can pick from more than 150,000 audiobooks, including bestsellers and recommendations from booksellers. You'll get the same audiobooks at the same price as the largest audiobook company out there. You know the name. But you'll be part of a different story, one that supports community. If you're new to audiobooks, they're the perfect way to get more books into your busy life. Listen during your commute, while doing chores, walking the dog, or just relaxing at home. All you need is a smartphone and the free Libro FM app. If you already love audiobooks and don't know what to listen to next, check out recommendations and curated lists from people who know audiobooks best. Booksellers. And us. We also have a playlist on there full of books that have been recommended on this podcast. Books in the Freezer special offer. You get 2 audiobooks for the price of one, just $14.99, with your first month of membership using code FreezerBook. This offer is valid for new members in Canada and the United States. Thank you, Libro FM, for supporting the show. So, I wanted to talk about my first pick, which is We Ride Upon Sticks by Quan Berry. This is about a group of teen girls in a town right outside of Salem in the 1980s. They are at a field hockey camp and they aren't doing well, so they turn to the power of witchcraft they all rip off like pieces of fabric and they all create this blue armband and they write their name in this Emilio Estevez notebook and they are like, we have power now. And they start winning matches. Like they start doing very well. And I love this book because it's written in like a plural first person. So everything is like we did this. We are just this collective group. But it has like 10 or 12 main characters. So you follow each of them and you see everything that each like person is going through and you follow them, but it's still this collective we. And as they start, like, you go through their season and as they start winning more games, they then become convinced that they have to feed the power by doing bad things and following their urges. And like you see that they kind of start to like free themselves from the expectations that people have of them because they're like, well, actually, like I have to feed the power. And if we're going to win this game, I like have to do this thing that I feel like doing. And so far it is one of my favorite reads of the year. It's very YA in that it has like, you know how YA has those things where like in English class we're reading Great Expectations, so like the things in the story are going to mirror the plot of Great Expectations. So they are reading The Crucible and they like mention it a lot and it's like a reference point for like a lot of the things they say. And one of the girls like tries out and is like in the play of The Crucible. And I just love it. It's also very 80s. Like the Emilio Estevez thing. And one of the girls has a hair, like the bang claw, and they are all convinced that it has like supernatural powers.
That's so great.
It's like capitalized like the claw.
I love it.
But there's also just like real stuff that they're dealing with. This is 80s suburbia and there's people dealing with racism or like, being adopted into like a family of a different race, living with like a single mother and like a bunch of different things that they're all dealing with. But I feel like with this collective voice, it's like they're all dealing with it together and having this like collective experience. And I just had so much fun with it.
I love it because it's kind of like their own little coven. Like that's
yes.
It kind of. Did you read? I think it's The Babysitter's Coven.
No, that was on my list.
I read that a little while ago, and it was really cute. I liked it. So if that might be something cool to kind of pair with that one.
I will have to pick that up next. This is very room temperature. I honestly wouldn't really even call it horror, but it had a lot of, references and elements of it. And it was such a fun story, but it was, very room temperature, very fun, and just a great story about these female friendships. And that is We Ride Upon Sticks by Quan Berry.
I'm going to have to check that out. That sounds great. I guess if I was going, I'm going to just start with my all-time favorite and just go for it. So Circe by Madeline Miller is probably, oh my gosh, it might be one of my favorite books. I wouldn't say it's like in my top 3 because those are pretty solidified for me these days. But it's definitely in my top 5. I read it a couple years ago and it is this magical, fantastical retelling of Circe. So we kind of get, a less than lovely portrayal of her in the Odyssey. And we don't really get to even see her that much in the Odyssey. We kind of just know her as, the woman who's turning men into pigs. And don't get me wrong, she does that here too, but we get a little bit more of her backstory, her origin story. It's very much a feminist retelling of who she is, who she's becoming. We get to see her journey. She pretty much goes through almost all of the archetypes that I mentioned, like the hunted, the isolated, the enraged, and the fabled. We get to kind of see her go through these transitions until she finds out, like, who she is, who she was meant to be, and kind of this best, most complete version of herself. And it's filled with, there's romance, there's monsters, there's these like wonderful hero and anti-hero journeys throughout. You get to meet different gods and goddesses and kind of learn a lot of their mythology and folklore as well. So I think if you're somebody who's into folklore and retellings and stuff like that, Circe is absolutely going to blow your mind about it, because you're going to learn a lot while you read too. But I think it also kind of it makes us question again who the witch is, because again, I think we all have this this idea of who she is when we're very young, and then this book really challenges that from a lot of different perspectives. So I felt like while I was reading it, I got to know like a completely different character, and one that I really could see myself in and associate with. So room temperature wise, this one's blowing off the thermometer for me. Like I absolutely, absolutely loved it. I can't recommend it enough. And honestly, anything by Madeline Miller. She has an Achilles book out that's really great. She's just an overall really good author for like these witchy, folkloric type of retellings.
I still have to read Circe, but I did love Song of Achilles.
Yes, yes. So good. Oh, you'll have to let me know when you read Circe. Honestly, it's like it's almost like you're reading long form poetry at some point. It's like it's just so lyrical, and just like it feels like a spell. That's the best way that I can kind of describe it. It's like a very long spell that you're reading.
I will have to do that. I know. I loved Song of Achilles, so I don't know like why I've waited so long or why I've put it off. I think maybe it's because I feel like I need to like reread the Odyssey to like have a little more context for like who she was, but I will do that too. Just have the full experience. Okay, so my next pick is going in a little bit of a different direction, but it is Hex by Thomas Oldhoyvelt, and this is translated from the Dutch by Nancy Forrest Flyer. So I feel like we've been talking about these like positive portrayals of like empowered women, and this is very much which is the antagonist. She is terrible, and she is holding this whole town hostage.
That's what I like to hear.
So a lot of witch stories do lean into the urban fantasy side. I would say this one is very much in the horror camp. An isolated town, Black Spring, is haunted by a 17th century woman whose eyes and mouth are sewn shut. The town is cursed, and basically all who live there can never leave. There are systems in place to sway away new potential residents. And that's actually how the book opens. It's like this couple looking at this house, and you just see someone in a control room kind of like, nope, get them out. Like, engage this protocol, like trying to get these people out of there. And they end up moving in, and they're like, well, we tried to stop you. Now you live here and you're cursed and you can never leave. So you probably should have just left.
Sucks to suck. Here you are.
You probably should have listened to the 17 red flags that we were like trying to put up in front of your face. This follows the basically new generation. So the teens in the city are very tired of the restrictions and try to push back against the ancient curse because, they have been born into this curse. They were born into this town. They can never leave. And you see how this curse is integrated into this modern society. Like there's an app, and everyone just kind of knows where the witch shows up because she just shows up. Like there's also a scene where a family's having dinner and she just shows up in the living room, and the mom just puts like a tea towel on her face so they don't have to like look at her while they're eating dinner, but they can't like move her. It's about how everyone basically just has to like live around this curse, and everyone's just like whatever about it. But this new generation is like, no, like why don't we fight back? Why don't we try to like outsmart her or like get rid of this lady and like have us leave? And it's about what happens when they do that. And I thought it was interesting because it really gets into the the angst that this new generation has, and then I thought it really did a great job of kind of going into the hysteria that can happen in these isolated small towns and kind of mirroring the hysteria and accusations that happened during the witch trial era. And the description of the witch is just so eerie, and that her like mouth is sewn shut because if you like unsew her mouth, she's like says these incantations and she like drives people to suicide. Like she is just like scary. She is
I got to get to that book. I've had it on my shelf forever. And I think it's like one of those things where I'm just so excited to read it that like I don't read it because I always want it there as that. I don't know if that makes sense. Maybe I'm just crazy.
No, I have so many books on here like that where I'm like, I should have read it by now. I know I will like it, but it's just there for me right now for the one day I decide to get to it.
Yes.
So for this one, for me, it was a fridge. There was some genuinely like scary imagery, and like I said, for like a witch story where we see like witch's antagonist, it was like ugh, like scary getting into like the things that she could do and the way that these teens were thinking that they could outsmart the system, despite everyone telling them that it's just not possible. It's not gonna happen. Just let it go. Just live with. It's not that bad. We just can't leave. So it was just, I thought, very interesting. So that is Hex by Thomas Oldhovelt. But it was translated by Nancy Forrest Flyer. And I know a big thing is the original Dutch has a different ending than the American ending. And I don't know what it is. So if someone out there knows what it is, just tell me. Just email it to me.
I don't read Dutch. Me, I haven't read it yet. So I think the next one that I want to talk about, kind of change things up and go to YA a little bit on my end, is Root Magic by Eden Royce. So this one came out not too long ago. And it's basically, I think it's a really smart book for children to read. It's very diverse. It's very inclusive. It's highlighting root work and hoodoo and stuff like that, which honestly, I really don't know if I had ever even heard of until I became an adult. So I think to see that in in a young adult, middle grade type of book, I think is absolutely brilliant because it's highlighting cultures, it's kind of removing those stereotypes, and it's giving, a really accurate portrayal of different cultures and practices, which I just think is really cool. And so it follows, a brother and sister that are slowly starting to learn root magic from their family who, their lineage, they've always been root workers. It's always been kind of part of who they are. But now they're kind of, having the mirror shattered, if you will, and they're actually starting to learn like what it is, what it can do, why people are doing root to begin with. And when that glass is shattered, it's like their whole world opens up and they start seeing things that they'd never noticed before. And they start understanding why protective magic is a thing. And they start learning about what's actually hiding in the swamp. And, they're just seeing a whole different world. And you're seeing this through the eyes of kids, which is really, kind of fun because there's like a comedic element that goes along with the fear that I think is really smart. But you're also seeing, these two children are being, they're going pretty much to an all-white school. So they're one of the last schools that was kind of being segregated after Brown versus the Board of Education and all of that. And you're seeing kind of how people look at them as children, as people, as root workers. Like you're seeing them actively fight against segregation and stereotypes and black magic, honestly. And I kind of want to talk about that just a little bit because there is this like huge problem, I think, in the witchcraft kind of community or the way that it's portrayed, especially in horror, where black magic is bad and white magic is good. And we even kind of see that in The Craft, which I think is everybody's kind of like introduction to like witchery. They go to the supernatural store and there's the curtain with the white witch in the back and she's like, I'll protect you. And Nancy's, taking books and running away and summoning, all hell's breaking loose. And so you kind of get this division that, its roots are very racist. And I think to have a book, especially again, that's coming out for children, that's tackling this head on and showing and kind of bringing awareness to that very type of problematic, systemic, racist issue, both in like real life and in spirituality, I think is amazing. And it's something that's kind of tackled throughout the entire book with the police and the community and stuff. So I think, as a spooky book, it's YA, so it's not going to be terribly horrifying, but there's a lot of really good scares in it that I liked. And I think as kind of a teaching tool, as a good way to show how horror can handle real life things and use it as a teaching tool, and how that kind of validates the genre a bit more for people who are kind of skeptical and on the line. I think this book is absolutely fantastic for that. So I'd say, temperature wise, I'd put it a little bit above room temp, honestly, just because I think of all the good it does. But the horror that is in the book is actually like, I was pretty taken. Like, I was kind of surprised. Like, for YA, I was like, okay, like there's some like scary like poppet things that happen. Like the swamp is terrifying. Like even while I was reading it at night, I was like, okay, we're just going there. Like that's impressive. So yeah, it's really good. So that would definitely have my seal of approval for it.
Nice. It is interesting because I feel like every culture has a type of witchcraft.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you touch on that in your class a bit?
So the book that I usually teach, like when I'm doing like a 15-week course, is I, Tituba, Black Witch of Salem, and that's by Mary C. Condé, and it's creative nonfiction. I don't even know really how I would describe it, because we don't really know what happened to Tituba in the Salem witch trials. Like, we know she was imprisoned, we know she was sold, and then she kind of just disappears. And a lot of that has to do with her being a slave and her, coming overseas and all of this stuff. And Mary C. Condé really did a lot of research to kind of highlight Tituba's culture and kind of, again, bring some education to what it was that she practiced. And like, was she practicing hoodoo? Was she practicing witchcraft? Does that matter? I think it does. Like all of this kind of stuff about just kind of her race, her ancestry, her lineage. And she kind of gives us Tituba's life, a fictionalized version, but one that's really based off a lot of research. And so I really like to use that book as like a stepping stone. And I was really lucky because the first time I taught the class, I actually had a couple students who practiced hoodoo. And I even had another student whose family practiced voodoo as well. And
Wow.
voodoo's being like, a closed practice and stuff like that. And I would say hoodoo, it's more eclectic. So I don't know if it's technically a closed practice, but it's not something that I'm going to, as a white woman, go jump head into and like not without any type of understanding. And these girls they were so wonderful about kind of sharing their experiences and kind of bringing that into the class, and kind of talking about how it contradicts or works against or is similar to other types of witchcraft. So I think I try to bring some of that into my classes when I'm teaching them, but never from me. I will always point students, to a better source that's like practiced and into it and stuff like that. I'll let them know that it exists, but like in terms of teaching it, that's going to come from the people who actually practice it.
Okay, so I've had a few witchy videos pop up on my For You page on TikTok, and I've heard the term closed practice thrown around. What does that mean?
Yeah, so closed practice means it has to be a family thing. Like it's something like you're from that specific place. It's taught to you by a certain, like you're initiated. It's just for them. Like I could never practice voodoo. I don't have the ancestors behind me for that. I don't have a way in. It's not part of my culture. Like that is just for those people to practice it. Some people will disagree with me and say that I could. I very strongly disagree with that. But to each their own. I think most people would say like that's a closed practice, like leave it to that specific group. Witchcraft is something that's more eclectic. So anybody can kind of practice that. But voodoo, you really have to have the family lineage and connection to the land and everything like that, um, in order to be able to make those types of connections.
All right. That makes sense. All right, so my final pick is an anthology, and it is Hex Life: Wicked Tales of New Witchery, edited by Christopher Golden and Rachel Autumn Deering. And there was a ton of really fun stories in here. Like, I was looking through the table of contents again, and I'm like, well, I'm only going to pick like a few to kind of talk about, but I had a hard time even narrowing it down. But I love the little introductory story by Kat Howard called Invitation to a Burning. And then the story that follows right after that is Widow's Walk by Angela Slatter. And it's about this small town and this house that is just full of these like witchy widows who are like looking out for this girl and like take her in. I don't know. It was just like very cozy and cute. Just like this whole house of just like all these women. Um, and there was such a range in like the styles. Like there were the more like cozy classical witchy stories. There were some stories that I think were part of a bigger literary universe that like you were just getting a little snippet of. And then there were some that were a little more horror, like witch is the antagonist type of story. So they were like all over the place and I loved it. Jennifer McMahon wrote one called The Dear Wife. There was a really funny one by Hilary Monahan called Bless Your Heart. And it was, like you mentioned earlier, like a kitchen witch getting back at a PTA mom after her son gets bullied.
That's great.
That was really good. And then one of the creepier ones was by Tananarive Due called Last Stop on Route 9. And it's like two siblings on their way to a funeral. And then they're suddenly on a road that shouldn't exist and that they've heard is like haunted by a witch. So that was one of the more like creepier ones. Rating wise, this was all over the place, so I don't tend to give temperature ratings to like big anthologies with like multiple authors because it's like everyone went a different way with it. But I had a lot of fun with it. This had been on my TBR for a long time, and I'm really glad I finally like picked it up and got around to it. I love anthologies. Yeah, it's a good one. That's Hex Life: Wicked Tales of New Witchery. Yeah, it was fun. It was a fun one.
Staring at it right now. I need to add that to my summer reading list. Oh. So I guess I kind of want to pick a book that's maybe a little atypical. And it's a poetry collection called The Nightgown and Other Poems by Taisia Katiskiakaya. I think I'm pronouncing that right. If not, I'm sorry. And it is this kind of delicious folkloric poetry collection where she kind of talks about her own experiences, coming over to the United States and kind of learning to adapt to a new culture, and how that kind of like changed her, maybe her identity to the witch and kind of how the witch kind of shape shifts within her. And there's a lot of like really dark, beautiful, just creepy poems in here. But there's also kind of these like surreal landscapes, like kind of very Wonderland-esque poems. And if you look up the book, there's this huge, fat, boily blue frog on the cover with this massive tongue that's like intertwining the title. And it's just, it's such a cool image, and it speaks well to kind of like, what we associate with the witch, and then kind of peeling it back to kind of see what she really is to Taisia. And it's really cool because this specific author also has I'm trying to think how I would even describe it. It's kind of like a column, like an advice column, but it's a book, and it's called Ask Baba Yaga. And it's really neat because what she does is she has people write to her about any problems or anything that they have, or if they need advice on something. And then she responds to them as Baba Yaga, which I think is like the coolest thing in the world. And so I listened to a podcast on Pam Grossman's The Witch Wave, where she had her as a guest. And she said it was just really neat to kind of like conjure Baba Yaga and like become her and kind of like build this relationship with this, potentially really terrifying witch. And so that's a lot of fun. And then she also is kind of one of the minds behind the literary, or the book Literary Witches. and the Oracle deck, Literary Witches, which is something that I use for my witch class. So she's just kind of, I mean, she's really somebody who's taught me to kind of look for the witch in different places, and to look at people and how they might identify with her. And I think the Nightgown is just, it's a collection of poetry that really kind of brings all of that together. So that would definitely be something. If you're interested in starting out with her, I would start with her poetry collection and then kind of, move on through the rest of her work. Because kind of similar to what you said about the anthology, because, there are certain poems that I just completely am in love with. I don't know that giving this one a rating is like completely fair. But I will say that, I've read a lot of poetry so far this year, and this one has just continued to kind of stay with me. And the first poem in the book is called The Folklore. And it's something that I've come back and I've read just, I don't even know how many times at this point. Like if it's dark and creepy and stormy outside, I'm likely in my office reading that poem. So it has my highest recommendation.
I will have to check that out. I know I had an Anne Sexton collection that was on my shelf that I picked up because you had it on the dock too as a possibility. So I have it there ready to go. And it was funny because before that, I think my only knowledge of her as a poet was from Gilmore Girls, where they break into the school and they like have their little ritual where they like break into the headmaster's office and they're like reading an Anne Sexton poem, which is kind of witchy as it is.
Yeah, Sexton's work, I just, I think last night I finished reading her collected works, and I just like, I felt empty and scared. And like, it just, I mean, I don't know how she would feel being called a witch. My suspicion is she would hate it and not be a big fan. But my gosh, like her poems are just, they're horrifying in the best, most beautiful ways. But some of them, I just, there's really no way that you can say that she's not at least invoking the witch in them. Like so you'll have to let me know when you read it, because I'll be excited to talk about it.
Will do. And one of my almost picks was Goddess of Filth by V. Castro. And the only reason I didn't quite pick it was because I'm like, this is more of a possession story. But I was like, I feel like it's very witchy, though. Like this group of girls getting together and they accidentally conjure up something that ends up possessing one of their friends. And she like becomes very empowered with this like Aztec spirit that takes her over.
That sounds witchy to me.
Yeah, so I was like, that was my like almost pick. So I'm sneaking it in there. Like I'm acting like I'm not. I'm sneaking it in here. It fits.
I love it.
Well, something I like to ask all my guests is for a chilling obsession. So what's something in horror that you've been enjoying lately?
I know I'm going to catch so much shade for this. So I have only recently really started getting into Creepshow. It's been one of, like, I've been meaning to watch it like on Shudder forever. And when it first came out, I watched House of the Head by Mallerman. And I loved it. Like, I was like, this is like, it literally was one of those things that just got inside of me and like shook me to my core, because dolls freak me out. So that was like a really rough, it was a really rough episode for me. But I loved it. And for whatever reason, I didn't watch anymore after that. And so I would say within the past like week or so, I've gone back and I've started watching it, and I am completely obsessed now. I finished the first season. I was like getting out the old Creepshow movie. I ordered the Creep, Pop Funko. Like it's like part of my life.
Oh, it's a thing now.
Yeah, it's a thing. It's who I am.
Did you start the second season yet?
No, I haven't.
Oh my. Okay, so the first episode has like a very Pittsburghy episode, and I was very excited.
Oh man. Okay, so I'll probably watch it today, honestly, because once I start, I just can't stop. Like I'm a horrible binger for things like this, so I'll be sure to let you know.
Okay, please do. And then the newer tradition that we have is also asking our guests what their final girl song would be.
Yeah, so this one ended up being pretty easy. It came to me pretty fast. So I love In This Moment. I got to see them in concert a couple years ago. So I would say my final girl song would be Black Widow.
Okay. What are the vibes in that?
Very Black Widow, like a woman who's going to come and like rip your head off and eat you after she has sex with you. Like very much the whole like femme fatale. Like I'm here and I'm empowered and I'm not letting anybody come for me.
I can get with that. All right. Well, I will have to listen to it right after this episode and add it to the list. And thank you so much for coming on here and talking with me about this.
Thank you for having me. This is an absolute blast.
Where can people find you online?
Yeah, so I am on Twitter and Instagram as Wytovich. I have my blog, which is sytovich at blogspot.com, or you could just look up Join Me in the Madhouse. And I do a lot of author interviews and just kind of some other like personal essays and stuff on there. And then my website is stephaniemwytovich.com. And so you can find all my books and all kind of stuff, about me and what I'm up to on there as well.
Well, check that out. And thanks so much again for coming on.
My pleasure.
Books in the Freezer is a bi-weekly podcast. We post episodes every other Tuesday. You can find us on Twitter at Books Freezer Pod, on Instagram at Books in the Freezer, and on Facebook at facebook.com/Books in the Freezer. There is also a Facebook group if you would like to join that. And we're on TikTok now at Books in the Freezer if you're into that. If you would like to support the podcast, there are many ways of doing that. One way is to become one of our patrons over on Patreon. There is a $1, $3, and a $5 level with different things to offer at each level, from early episode releases or knowing what next week's episode topic is going to be, to Voxer group chats and movie nights and bonus episodes. So check that out if that interests you. Again, that is patreon.com/Books in the Freezer. And another way to support the show is to use the Amazon link in the show notes. You basically would just do your normal Amazon shopping like you usually would. You just click our link to get you there. So the most interesting item purchased using the Amazon link recently is a pair of Birkenstocks, which is awesome. Hope you are enjoying them. But you don't have to spend any money to support the show. Word of mouth is huge to small independent podcasts like this. So tell a friend about us, post about us on social media, and tag me. Because I will say one thing I miss from doing YouTube that is more difficult on podcasts is listener feedback, because there's not just like a comment box on the bottom of episodes that everyone has access to. So if you have something to say about the episode, comment on the episode post on Instagram. I would love to hear what you thought about it. If you have a book that you think would be perfect for the episode, things like that, I would love to hear from you. Okay, and like after recording this episode, in the beginning of the episode, Stephanie was talking about how there's things that we can kind of read as witch media, even though they aren't like explicitly witchy. So I kept trying to think of examples of things that would fit that mold. And I think Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants totally fits that. Please tell me that you agree with me. Or tell me your own thing that you think could be read as witchy. I would love to hear it. Anyway, I am Stephanie. You can find me on Twitter at lady_gagnon. That's LADY_GAGNON, or on Instagram at That's What She Read, and that's with 2 A's. Thank you so much, and see you next time on Books in the Freezer.